Et la France, c'est pas ça. La France, ça doit pas être ce truc où on monte les uns contre les autres pour garder les privilèges de quelques-uns.
Le patriarcat préexistait au capitalisme, donc il peut lui survivre.
La France, elle est vraiment au bord d'une maladie qui est le fascisme.
L'escroquerie, c'est qu'on a fait prendre l'extrême droite pour la droite et la gauche pour de l'extrême gauche.
Pour moi, on ne peut plus parler d'inaction climatique, mais d'action délibérée, de destruction du vivant.
On parle de désirabilité depuis avant, on n'est pas à la Fashion Week. Là, le sujet, c'est très très simple, c'est la dignité des gens.
Si nous, on nous répète tout le temps, toujours, qu'on n'est pas ici chez nous.
Pourquoi il y a des hommes déguisés en femmes? Faut répondre quoi à ta gamine de 9 ans? Que c'est une personne qui prône la paix avec des cheveux longs.
On se pose et on cause.
Le podcast qui donne la parole à ceux qu'on entend le moins.
Notamment les jeunes.
Et qui vulgarise les sujets politiques du quotidien.
Well, I think food has a really good place in my life.
Well, food is very important for me. I think it's the base to have a good health.
I think food for me, first of all, it's a source of energy.
It's one of the things that keeps you alive.
But then it is also, it is your energy, it is your survival, it is your culture, it is the way you communicate.
It makes me feel really emotional sometimes.
I think for me, food is somehow a comfort place.
They say there are different love languages. I would say that food is probably my love language.
I'm Italian, so for me it was always also like a way to have some like community time, like a way for people to like share.
I mean, I would say that my relationship with food has been complicated sometimes.
And then when I started to go abroad as a student for university, it became more of a, oh wow, now I really need to think about this.
I don't really have much time to cook, for example, but I still enjoy and I really love to come to La Farce, because here there's also always somebody cooking here.
For me, cooking is the biggest thing that brings me joy.
I don't like to cook, but I like to eat.
I like to cook for others and friends, but for myself, I'm pretty, I guess, very cheap.
I'm Palestinian, so for me, it's not only food. It's a way to make people more resilient and to improve their resilience.
Do I look at where my food comes from? I would say not always, depending on the budget also of the month.
Yeah, I really care if food, like from which country the food comes from, how much it traveled, is it in season, stuff like that.
Yeah, I do check where my food comes from. Then sometimes you have to balance it out with price.
But also it's difficult to pay attention to everything because then it gets expensive. And so for La Farce, honestly, I know that some things are like from big supermarket chains, obviously, but I also feel like it's good that we have the opportunity to eat these things instead of throwing them away.
I have no problem that it comes from the supermarket's trash.
I don't know, it's free food, I would never complain about that, and it's really cool that there's this possibility of just redistributing food that's left over to students.
It's very economic, and second of all, I feel like I'm also doing something good for the environment.
In La Farce, it doesn't bother me like I used to do dumpster diving and also take things directly from the trash. So I don't really care. I think it's kind of a social thing. If we see things in the trash, we think it's disgusting, but for me it's not an issue.
They are trying to collect food which would have, otherwise just rotten or had gone to waste. At least there is still some utility, there is still some, use for that food, and in such a productive way.
I like being a raccoon at La Farce and being the clean trash of Geneva.
And for me at La Farce, what I like is the fact that it's trash, because it's as good as if you buy it or sometimes even better than when you buy it in the supermarket.
I guess we all remember the COVID crisis, and even though we've experienced it differently, the outcomes of this specific event are sort of similar everywhere. It had an impact in our lives, and as individuals, I think it affected our relationships with school, with work, with other people, and with ourselves. As societies, The COVID crisis especially highlighted the structural causes of poverty, which includes food insecurity. And yet, the fundamental causes of hunger, food insecurity, and malnutrition are not new. They're rooted in political, economic, and cultural exclusions, as well as in social injustice and discriminations. They're often explained by unequal power relations that systematically disadvantage the most vulnerable groups in society, which includes students. And what is very visible is that European states, such as France or Switzerland, have for decades promoted the right to food at the international level while failing to recognize it at the national level. In my opinion, it could be linked to imperialism or colonialism, but today that's not our topic. But still, I think it's a huge paradox. In Switzerland, appropriate food is available in sufficient quantity for the population as a whole. And yet, thousands of poor families cannot access it. In 2023, in Geneva alone, more than 60,000 people used food aid. Between 2022 and 2023, Geneva solidarity stores, which are reserved for people in situations of precarity, saw their attendance increase by more than 12% on average, and even though 2022 was already a sadly record-breaking year, 2023 was worse. In 2024, Partage, the Genevan food bank that collects and distributes unsold goods to its partner institutions, distributed 285,000 kilos of unsold goods, which is the equivalent of 6.5 million meals. So that's huge. And to give you another example, each Swiss person throws away 330 kilos of food per year. So again, that's huge. And, things are not much better in France. In 2023, 9.7 million tons of food were wasted, of which 3.8 million tons were still edible. At the household level, that's 61 kilograms of food wasted per year and per person. And at the same time, at least 8 million people are affected by food insecurity, and 5.5 million depend on food aid, sometimes for very long period. And that dependency is itself a powerful factor of social exclusion. More generally, food has always been a marker of social class. Studies show that environmental and social aspirations around food actually cross all social classes, meaning that people care about what they eat and where it comes from. However, in practice, sustainable and quality food remains largely reserved for those with the economic, cultural, and social capital to access it. In other words, to have access to sustainable and quality food, you must have the time and the knowledge to navigate the food system. Thus, a whole part of the population, lower middle class, working class, people from immigration backgrounds, or students, find themselves excluded from organic products and quality labels. All of this brings us to a specific part of the population that is, in my opinion, too often overlooked, which are students. Because students are not just struggling with tuition fees, health issues, or housing. Food is a central part of their precarity. In 2023, 86% of students in Geneva spent less than 100 francs per month on food, and actually half of them did not exceed 50 francs. And so the consequences are real and concrete, like skipping meals or reducing quantities. So students have mobilized themselves around the topic of food. And for example, in Switzerland, in Geneva, in 2021, the movement Occupation Sans Fin occupied UNIMI, a Genevan faculty, for 2 weeks, demanding the return of meals at 3 francs for everyone, sustainable university funding for the free grocery store La Farce, and a radically different cafeteria model. However, today, the meal is still at 5 francs for students. And we had kind of the same issue in France when, in 2023, the left group at the National Assembly proposed extending the €1 meal to all students and not just scholarship holders. At the time, the proposal was rejected, but it somehow has been adopted later and is now official since May 2026. But, well, it's not as perfect as it sounds, but whatever. So today, we're going to dive into all of this. And as you may know, I'm a student myself, so it was important for me to also speak with students and about students, their food insecurity, the short-term solutions put in place for them, and the long-term solutions that activists and researchers have been thinking about. That's why I'm so happy to say that the testimonies in this episode come from students who either receive support from or volunteer at La Farce, an organization that plays a significant role in my everyday life. I will give you more details about La Farce later, but first, let's define the right to food. According to Olivier de Schutter, former UN Special Rapporteur on the right to food, the right to food is defined as regular, permanent, and free access to food that is quantitatively and qualitatively adequate and sufficient. The right to food also needs to correspond to the cultural habits of individuals. So the right to food is not the right to a minimum ration of calories or proteins. It does not correspond to food aid. In fact, the right to food and food aid are two distinct and rather contradictory concepts. The right to food is recognized as a human right, while food aid is an emergency, a temporary measure. And according to the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, and because it is a human right, states are obligated to adopt the necessary measures to fight hunger. While all rights surrounding the right to food are meant to be progressively realized, certain minimum fundamental obligations must be fulfilled immediately. In France, the right to food is enshrined in several legal instruments which guarantee the right to be free from hunger and the right to access adequate food in a dignified, sustainable, and self-determined way. However, neither the Constitution nor any law currently preserves the right to food. In other words, the effective realization of the right to food has no solid legal framework in France. And as noted in a report by Action Against Hunger, France takes a short-termist approach to food issues, despite the fact that food sits at the intersection of pressing social and environmental challenges. Thus, French public policy and the legal framework must evolve. Protecting the right to food means identifying and acting on every level that would allow each person to have agency over and choice in what they eat. And same in Switzerland, like the Swiss federal constitution does not contain an explicit right to food, only the right to assistance in situations of distress and the Confederation's obligation to ensure the security of the population's food supply partially cover what the right to food entails. However, the Canton of Geneva has enshrined the right to food in its cantonal constitution. Its Article 38A says, I quote, "The right to food is guaranteed. Every person has the right to adequate food as well as to be free from hunger." End of the quote. This was accepted by popular vote in June 2023, came into force in July 2023, and was guaranteed by the Federal Assembly in September 2024. In a report from 2024, the Geneva Academy of International Humanitarian Law and Human Rights makes several recommendations for the Canton of Geneva and Geneva communes. According to their respective competences, they should revise existing laws, policies, strategies, and programs. For example, they should promote the right to food through public awareness campaigns. They should take targeted measures to train students, children, public administrators, or food and agricultural actors on the importance of realizing this right in Geneva. They should also regulate the private sector to promote the realization of the right to food and support a fair transition towards sustainable food systems, which includes the regulation of food prices so they're fair for producers and accessible for consumers. Then they should support local and healthy production. They should promote short supply circuits and identify opportunities to increase local production. They should reinforce links between producers and consumers and promote fair trade in Geneva as well as in Switzerland. They should finally aim for the universalization of social protection to ensure that benefit levels are high enough to guarantee every person a sufficient standard of living. Concretely, Genevans' minimum wage stands at almost 25 francs per hour in 2024, but this does not apply to agriculture and floriculture, where it drops to less than 80 francs, so that gap needs to be addressed. And obviously I forgot to mention, but this additional right to the Genevan Constitution was supported and guided by dozens of actors engaged in agricultural production, distribution, consumption, health, human rights, the environment, or academia. Together in 2023, they adopted the Manifesto for the Right to Food, a call for the elaboration of an implementing law, and a public food policy. I won't go into all the details, but I would like to highlight a few key points. First, and I think this is crucial, guaranteeing the right to food requires a paradigm shift, because food chains are globalized, unequal, and not sustainable. There are deep asymmetries between local, fragmented production and an industrial agri-food system that concentrates power among, not that much actors. As we already established, the right to food is not simply the right to be free from hunger. It also means respecting, protecting, and fully realizing everyone's right to regular, permanent, and free access to adequate food. That means guaranteeing that quality, sustainable food is accessible to all. Concretely, this requires not only a law on the right to food, but rather transversal public food policy. And for instance, the manifesto calls for the creation of a participatory and parity body, something like a council or a commission on food composed of representatives from the canton of Geneva, Genevan Commons, and actors involved in agricultural production, distribution, consumptions, or social and food assistance. Second, the manifesto highlights that the fight against food waste must be removed from food aid and treated as a public policy in its own right, because food items should never become waste. Rather, the state should foster strong collaboration to redistribute surpluses and support the revalorization of damaged products through preparation and conservation techniques such as fermentation, drying, or composting. Third, education against food waste should be mandatory in schools and aligned with the Plan d'études Roman. Because, today, according to the manifesto, the existing framework is okay, but it does not apply equally across schools. So, to conclude this part, the constitutional right to food is not a cure-all. In fact, the proposed implementing law includes some concerning measures, for example for la Farce, and that's why Lucien, one of its employees, explained to me.
So there are a few items in the law that is a problem for La Farce activities. Mainly, they want to use the same criteria for all of the people who receive food aid in Geneva. And La Farce was created with the concept of letting people choose if they need help. And it's one of the basics of La Farce is we're never going to ask people to prove that they are in a situation where they need help. If you feel like you need help, you can come to La Farce. And if they try to impose the same criteria to everyone who received food aid, like every association or structure like La Farce, they receive food from the food bank, we wouldn't be able to get any food. And so for us, it's really important that the law keeps the core idea of the constitutional law that has already passed in helping more than we're helping right now. And the law project is more the idea of helping less. It's always the same problem when you try to fit everyone into a small category to control everything. Is of course people are going to come outside of these borders, and again that's why La Farce was created, because there was something missing for students in the social structure in Geneva. That's the main point. There's also they don't want to help people if they aren't if they don't live in Geneva for less than 6 months, and that's also a problem for students. A lot of people come here for a year or two. They don't put their address in Geneva, which is, I guess, the norm. So we gave our comments on the project to the committee that's building the law, and we told them about these issues. There are also some more minor issues that are indirectly associated with La Farce, but we did a group response with all the groups that have kind of the same mindset as us. And we're waiting to see if they take that into account. It's also quite complicated because the law has some really precise items that are kind of ready and others that are really vague because they want to pass the law quite fast because it's already been almost 3 years that the constitution was changed. all of the food distribution points are in the same idea as us, even if we're like the most extremist in the sense that we accept anyone as long as you have a student ID. I mean, all of the food distributions have like different criteria, and a lot of them just like also accept people for a while, even if they don't have the proper papers. And so having the government like putting their nose in our stuff is quite complicated. Also because we're all private institutions, we're not part of the state. So the state telling us what you can and can't do is kind of a problem. And which is also one of the good things that Geneva has is kind of, well, Switzerland is very liberal, is that the state can't come in and impose itself. I don't agree it fundamentally, but in this case, I'm happy that we're independent at La Farce and we can do what we can, and nobody, they can defund us, but we don't depend on the state for our funding anyway. So there's still ways to function. And I had a talk with the new director of Partage, and which is the food bank in Geneva, and they're also private institution, a foundation. So they don't agree with that part of the law as well, and they're not going to change their criteria just because the law says so. So, I mean, we have political allies. I mean, all the field people who work on the field are aligned in those big problems that we want to change in the law. So yeah, I'm quite optimistic, but it's still complicated. We don't really know how the food aid structure will be organized in the future.
Now let's focus on student food precarity. To do that, I want to introduce you more properly to La Farce, a non-profit association created in 2020 by Oriane Greder and Mélodie Chabert while they were still students. It was a concrete response to fill a gap, and it remains the only student grocery store in Geneva. I've been volunteering there since the beginning of the academic year, and it is a place where we freely distribute food to students who feel they need it without requiring any financial proof. And that's important because having condition to access aid is itself a violation of the right to food, and that's something La Farce refuses to do. Concretely, as a student, you either pay 20 francs for a year or you sign up as a volunteer. Indeed, La Farce runs many thanks to its volunteers who organize distributions and participate in like food collection. But there is another important dimension to it. La Farce is also a genuinely warm and welcoming place. Many students, myself included, stay to share coffee, study, or just hang out. It is a real space for student socialization. And so, in that sense, it is also a form of doing politics. Yeah, of course, the objective is to fight precarity and reduce food waste, but it is also about creating solidarity and fostering social bonds. And the numbers reflect this. In 2023, more than half of beneficiaries had been coming for a year or more, so people know each other. In fact, 36% of students had met people at La Farce that they also saw outside the grocery store. Thus, the general atmosphere during distributions is very relaxed, shaped by minimal gatekeeping and a non-judgmental approach to distribution. Still in 2023, 98% of beneficiaries described La Farce as a convivial place where they feel at ease, and 90% felt that their discretion was preserved because being among peers significantly reduces the embarrassment or the shame that can come with accessing food aid.
I will define La Farce as community food center.
I really thought at the beginning, I thought La Farce is a really kind association that where I can find and get some food, cheap food. But now, like, it becomes like a small community or like a activity that I actually enjoy.
You know, I remember probably the first 2-3 times I came here, I just went straight through, got my food and left. And then I started talking more and more and stayed. I've been staying longer and longer, and it's a safe place. You know, you feel safe, you feel comfortable, you feel home.
I think it's a vibe in general, and I think it's also more than food per se, also with the other events, also the bike stuff, clothing, like the social project idea and the leftist ideology that lies at its core. I think it's a space that has to be there in Geneva.
I think for me, La Farce is getting together more so than just helping out.
I think helping at La Farce gives me something I would not have expected, and it would be the great ambience and the great people you meet here.
Honestly, I also didn't expect when I came the moral satisfaction of it all. Like, it feels really good actually to see other people smile and say like thank you and be happy about it when they get the food.
I don't know, helping people feels good, and I think it's kind of a way to give back to community and people you specifically don't know.
Yeah, a great source of joy and personal growth too, to meet a lot of people who came from all around the world and being able to discover their culture, their food with the Thursday meal.
There's always like a meal, especially on Thursdays, and I have discovered many new, I want to say, cuisines.
What I did not expect at La Farce is like so many friends that I made here.
La Farce gave me an opportunity of pluralism inside Geneva. Another way to speak Spanish inside Geneva, to make contacts, make people, and also that give me food for free.
Yeah, I think volunteering here is a political act, obviously, because we fight against capitalism again.
It can be seen as a political act, but I do not do it because it is a political act. Like, I just like being here.
I would see it more doing good for society, but not really. I wouldn't see La Farce as a political actor.
There's nothing that is not political. All our lives are political. Every choice you make, even if you don't want to make it political, it is.
I would say the fact of even coming here and getting food is already a political act. It's just going against waste.
For me, I haven't never thought about it in that sense, to be honest, because for me it's a necessity because,
My perspective to come here came really at the starting point as a place of necessity.
I think it can be a political act. I think for me it's more of a way to act in alignment with the things I value, which I mean also is by extension political.
With the idea that everything we do is somehow political, yes, but I don't necessarily always need to remind myself of that. I think it's also just nice to have a space where, you're doing something nice, you support the initiative, you meet people, and you also get something from it. So it's not just a campaign you do, but more also a community aspect indeed, which is then political again. So, yes.
That said, La Farce helps students but cannot protect the right to food on its own. In 2023, 56% of students felt that the food received was not sufficient for the week. For 41% of them, it was because the products they needed were not available, and for 34%, it was because there simply was not enough food. So students do complement what they receive with additional shopping, but La Farce still allows them to considerably reduce their expenses. Above all, still in 2023, 87% of students believe it is the responsibility of the state, commune or canton, to ensure that everyone receives adequate food in both quantity and quality. That said, there are critiques on free or low-cost solidarity grocery stores. First, distributing surpluses sustains a food system that supports large agri-food companies and overconsumption. It is a way of painting food aid green because giving food waste to people in precarity is neither good for them nor for the environment. It dangerously offers a clear conscience while avoiding the real moral and political problem. Feeding the most vulnerable with the leftovers of the rest of the society. And the cost of managing that waste falls on public money, donations, and, above all, on the free labor of volunteers. On top of that, this model actively prevents the emergence of genuine public policies. For example, in France, the state does not organize food aid, it simply detaxes it. Second, these stores rarely offer a complete or predictable selection. Short-circuit, organic, or sustainably produced food remains a minority, meaning that sustainable food is still largely reserved for economically advantaged populations. Third, even low-cost grocery stores cannot help the most financially destitute, those with almost no resources at all. And eventually, there is often a form of moralization within food aid. Food aid remains tied to a system that is more charitable than solidary. Additionally, the emergency food aid system has developed along several social fault lines, such as territorial or racial. And there is also a form of paternalism because food aid structures are in a position of authority. Consciously or not, there is this idea of a greater social intelligence on the part of those who help over those who are helped. Wanting to educate the most precarious among us to better manage their budgets or eat better means maintaining and reinforcing social inequalities by refusing to acknowledge their structural causes. And the moralization of food aid makes criticism difficult. Like, you cannot complain when you are still being helped. At La Farce, I think there is a warm and welcoming atmosphere, and so rather than educating beneficiaries, La Farce is more about the mutual sharing of knowledge. But well, that said, even with all these critiques, free or low-cost solidarity grocery stores are currently necessary for at least 4 main reasons. First, they fight against waste while allowing free or low-cost consumption. Second, they allow people who access them to be better respected in their dignity, like they choose what they want to take. Third, when they favor short agricultural circuits, they support sustainable agriculture. Fourth, some of them offer social support and socialization activities, helping people to exchange information. So we talked about short-term solutions, but on the long-term level, what would the solutions look like for consumers, for the environment, and for all the workers involved in the food production chain?
I would really appreciate it if we could educate more regarding food. What's in your plate and how did you prepare it?
If I could change one thing, it would be making the people believe that it's not a bad thing if an apple doesn't look perfect at first sight.
I think it's always the food waste.
I mean, in terms of food waste, definitely there's way too much food being wasted, while there's some people who can't have any meals at all.
We need to have a lot less plastic in the packaging. Why do we have so much plastic?
And everyone
should be able to eat without developing cancer, I guess.
I think the most important thing is that we should stop eating beef.
It is one of the biggest emitters and it is also so vulnerable to climate.
No meat. No, yeah. I would say, or in general, more control on also labor conditions for people working in agriculture industries.
Yeah, there is a lot of work in agriculture and in farmers' rights and in women's place in the whole industry. And
Like, for example, in my country, we have a huge issue. Like, nowadays, the ones that are working in the fields are migrants that are being exploited.
And yeah, I think most of the food should be free.
Yeah, and if I could, then I would also implement organizations such as Farce in Austria, because I think that's a thing Geneva here can be proud of and the students can really profit from it.
I think maybe to have more Farce like everywhere.
There should be Farce, like this kind of organization at every street corner.
Yeah, I guess accessibility is one of the most preoccupying thing.
We need to make or create more cooperative system.
I think capitalism is a big problem in the life in general, obviously, but especially in food system.
The monopoly around food is just still so ridiculous.
Burn the system.
So much food is being thrown away, and I think that's absurd. Like, all the food should be recycled. Well, not recycled, should be redistributed in one way.
The more local, the more sustainable, and we don't need to eat all the food in the world.
We need to understand that the world has food for everyone, just in a bad way of distribution.
Public authorities should, of course, play a central role in food aid, ensuring that people in need can live lives free from anxiety. But public institutions should also go further and facilitate the creation of structural mechanisms. One of the most promising long-term mechanisms currently being discussed in Switzerland is the social food insurance modeled on the AVS, the existing insurance system, socially financed through contributions proportional to income. It would allow inhabitants to feed themselves sustainably, access local production, respect the principle of food sovereignty, and participate in the democratic management of the food system. Alongside this, La Calim, an initiative deployed from October 2025 to December 2026, allow its members to receive a monthly amount of money to buy food products in places chosen according to criteria defined by their citizens' committees. So, together, the social food insurance and La Calim, these two mechanisms, aim to reinforce the collective and democratic engagement of inhabitants in food choices, also to facilitate physical and economic access to adequate food for everyone, and then to support a fair transition towards sustainable food systems. And similar initiatives have emerged across Europe in recent years. In France, for example, food solidarity initiatives have been multiplying across the country, testing the conditions for implementing something, once again, more structural. The most ambitious of this is the project for a social security of food, publicly supported since 2019 by a collective of associations and organizations. The social security of food is quite simple but radical. The goal is to integrate food into the general system of social security as it was first conceived in 1946. That means that it is financed through social contributions and based on universality of access and democratic management. Concretely, every person would receive a certain amount of money per month via a food vital card, giving them access to certain products. This project is rooted in a broader but essential concept, which is food democracy. The starting point is an observation. Large private groups hold a huge power over food, which directly contradicts the idea of free consumer choice supposedly guaranteed by the market. And so food democracy highlights this illusion and calls for the democratization of food systems. In other words, it means being citizens before being consumers or producers. It means being able to collectively choose what we eat with full knowledge of the context and the working conditions behind our food. Concretely, right now, there is a growing dualization of food consumption. On one end, a part of the population has real food choice, defined largely by quality labels and accessible to those with sufficient economic, cultural, and social capital. On the other hand, a large portion of the population is left choosing only between industrial products. So, the social security of food's ambition is precisely to offer a way out of this logic, reserving food aid for emergency while building a system that treats food as a common good rather than a market item. And that is not purely theoretical. On the ground, experiments are already ongoing. In Montpellier, in France, a common food fund managed directly by a committee of inhabitants has been operating since 2023. Like La Calim in Switzerland, it is a concrete experience of food democracy that allows people to find products they no longer had access to, as well as to reclaim spaces that were previously socially stigmatized. And around 20 innovative projects are now active in France, all working towards implementing the social security of food. And the lessons from these experiments are clear. Answers must be systemic. Local experimentation produces knowledge and tests what works, but the goal is a national framework. And that national framework is beginning to take shape. In February 2025, the National Assembly's Committee on Economic Affairs adopted a law on experimentation towards the establishment of a social security of food. The law lies on three governing principles: universality, solidarity, and democratic organization. Its objectives are to support access to healthy, high-quality, and balanced food, while supporting agricultural models that are remunerative for producers and respectful for the environment. To say it differently, the law creates an experimental national framework to consolidate local initiatives. So, now, where does all of this leave us? Food precarity is absolutely not a minor issue. Rather, it is a structural one, and it affects students just as it affects millions of other people. And of course, the solutions currently ongoing are essential. They fill a real gap, but they will not resolve the structural causes of precarity. As long as these initiatives rely almost exclusively on surpluses, function through reduced price sales, and depend on donations and volunteer labor, they remain temporary solutions. Solidarity grocery stores risk offering a clear conscience to a food system that generates inequality and waste on a big scale. And so the real solution is political. food must become again a political subject, as central to public action as education or health. And yeah, I think we can and we need to be a bit optimistic. In Geneva, the consecration of the right to food in the cantonal constitution is an historic first. The first time the right to food gained a legal foothold at this level. And it already has outcomes. Since 2023, the Genevan example has inspired initiatives in the canton of Vaud, at the federal level, in France, as well as in the Council of Europe. Similarly to La Farce, in France, Linky tries to help students while reducing food waste. Les Récupérants also critiques the food system while collecting supermarkets' food waste. So, as you can see, initiatives are multiplying and they represent a shift in how food is being conceived, not as a charity, but as a right. A right that implies structural investment, democratic governance, and a fair transition towards sustainable food systems. That would also reduce the health costs linked to poor nutrition or overweight, and it would also limit the environmental cost of a food system that is currently neither fair nor sustainable. The question of food is thus tied to the question of what kind of society we want to live in, and that is, at the end, a deeply political question. So yeah, I think I will leave you on that, and I would like to thank La Farce a lot, as well as all the people who shared their opinions. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope it would help you to think about food as a more political topic. If you liked this episode, don't hesitate to share it online or leave a comment. And yeah, that's all for me. Take care and see you soon. Bisous!
It is so overwhelming lately. All the news, everywhere, like everything that's happening at the same time. But stay focused. Try your best to be informed, and try to be active. It's okay if it's just local. It's okay if it's not like changing the world in one day. It's fine, because in any case we're humans and we're supposed to take care of ourselves also, because we're also a person. So if we want to help out people, we're also a person. Don't forget that.
Totally, period. I would also add that I think volunteering is a great act for your mental health.
And I hope that we'll all be fine.